We heard from the parents, or the parenting panel this morning. Then we went into technology, and we've just had a fabulous discussion about the research. And so, in a way, it's very appropriate that we're now going to tackle the policy aspects to all of this. And to help us steer through these choppy waters is a very good friend of mine, David Wright. David is the CEO, can I say the long name? Southwest Grid for Learning?
Yeah, you can do, but...
SWGfL, does that mean anything?
Yeah, that's better, yeah.
He's the CEO of the SWGfL and a director of the UK Safer Internet Centre, which is the National Awareness Centre and part of the European InSafe network. David has worked extensively in online safety for over 20 years with children, schools, and wider agencies, and he and I have crossed paths many times over the last 20 years, right?
They have.
In a nice
times
way.
With great pleasure as well.
So good to see you. All right, take it over.
Thank you very much. Stephen, thank you very much for the invitation to come and chair what is clearly the panel that everybody has been waiting for today. I realise that the rest were a dress rehearsal for this panel. So the panels are on policy. As Stephen said, I'm David Wright. I'm CEO of a UK charity, SWGfL. I'm part of the UK Safer Internet Centre. And we're doing a range of different things. I have had the pleasure of attending so many of these amazing FOSI events over probably 20 years or so. So it's great to see many friendly faces, so many friends amongst you, and also new faces too. So this panel, as Stephen said, draws together all those different comments, all the different contributions that we've had before. But the first thing we're clearly going to do is introduce the panel before you. So I'm just going to hand it over to Laura to introduce yourselves to everyone.
Hello, is this working? Hi everyone, my name is Lazaro Cabrera. I'm a Council and Program Director for Equity and Data at the Center for Democracy and Technology Europe. We're a nonprofit civil society organization that seeks to uphold international human rights in tech policy and legislation.
Hi, my name is Benoît Loutrel and I'm board member of ARCOM. ARCOM is a French audiovisual and digital media regulator. As an audiovisual media regulator, we are really French, I suspect, meaning we regulate the French media. As a digital media regulator, we are really European, meaning that we are only one member of the EU team of regulator. I'm happy to mention that I have my captain on my right. So just to mention that, and we'll discuss it later, that the DSA is really an EU maneuver where everybody's on board and we are one of the team players. Thank you.
Thank you, Benoît. And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Manuela Martra, and I work at the European Commission in DG Connect in one of the services which are based in Luxembourg. So the most common question that I got is, I was coming from Brussels to Paris, and actually I was coming from Luxembourg, and it was a very easy trip because it's easier to commute to Paris from Luxembourg than not from Luxembourg to Brussels. Having said that, we are very well connected with our colleagues in Brussels, which are really very busy and committed at the moment in implementing the Digital Service Act. In my role, I'm responsible for the Better Internet for Kids strategy. I'm the deputy head of unit, and I've been spending, I must say, most of my career on protecting and empowering children online, and in general on looking after the impact of digital transformation on people, on society, with a special eye to the most vulnerable ones. And also in our unit, we also deal with inclusion, since was also one of the topics that was discussed previously. So I think that many of the topics of today are very, very relevant to the work that we are doing, and we will disclose more soon.
And hello everyone, my name is Paul Schmite. I'm the deputy to the Ambassador for Digital Affairs, Henri Verdier, and I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France on issues of digital safety, so fight against disinformation, fight against terrorism online, and protection of children online.
Paul, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that introduction. So you can indeed see the variety of different perspectives that we have here, and certainly in preparation for this, it does say moderator up there rather than referee, I think, is what I'm hoping for. So clearly, this particular panel is the title around, from DSA to the USA, all around policy and around regulation, this transatlantic dialogue. And what we want to be able to do is to really just to probe, to share some of those insights from the panel that you have before you. So clearly Europe has been quite productive working to address online safety in recent years through a variety of different, particularly regulations. And so what the first question that's posed to the panel is what's working? What do you see that's working with regards to these regulations for the Europeans' approach to online safety? Who's going to go first?
Okay, thank you for volunteering me. No, I must say that for me it's really a pleasure, because having followed all the developments around protection and empowerment of children for many, many years, you can really see that there was the efforts were really stepping up, and there was a fantastic upgrade, the best we have never dreamed about. With the Digital Service Act, the famous 3 letters acronym that was, indirectly referred to from the very first panel of this morning. And, what has happened is that during the negotiation of this regulation, the co-legislator, so the Council and the Parliament, requested, even stronger provision on protection of minors. And then now we are at full speed, really, in the implementation of the Digital Service Act, and we have started already with what are called formal proceedings, so formal investigations towards the very large online platforms. And for 2 of them, for TikTok and for Instagram and Facebook, there are also, grounds of grievances on protection of minors. So this is very relevant. But coming to your specific question, what is working well is that we really have in the toolbox regulation, so a legal framework, and we have a policy framework. So I had the pleasure of launching the new Better Internet for Kids strategy in 2022. Together with Benoît. It was under the French presidency. We were in Toulon, and we had a vision. And we were already shared this vision that kids have to be protected, empowered, and respected. And then the DSA came, and really the first pillar of the strategy, the protection, is how it comes into place. And so we can really support and mobilize all, the ecosystem, and where the EU has been investing for many, many years to support this regulation. So I'm referring notably to the network of the Safer Internet Centers, to which also our moderator/referee is part of. The Better Internet for Kids portal. Why they are important? They are important because they have expertise, and they have experience, and they have access really to the users, the direct users. So today we discuss a lot as well on how to involve kids directly, and we do that a lot with the Better Internet for Kids strategy, and we are also offering this platform of consultation of young people for the DSA. So we think that this is really win-win. And then protection is good, the rules are important, but people, they need to know about the rules. So the kids and where they spend most of their time, so at the school, for instance, so there are really efforts to make these rules well understandable. We publish on Safer Internet Day this year a booklet with the provision on protection of minors in a public-friendly language and in all the official languages. Then, kids, they have to also continue to develop their competencies and to be empowered, and then they have to have also their say, and we have to respect them. So I think these are really the ingredients and what we are doing at the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Manuela. And there's also a mention of Safer Internet Day there, which next year will be the 11th of February, which is a note for everyone's diary. 11th of February 2025. Paul, from a member state perspective.
So do you want me to answer on what's working in the DSA?
Yeah.
I think the way that the DSA was built was quite successful. The DSA wanted to provide a platform of transparency in order to improve the accountability and then to be able to push sanctions. And I think this process of transparency, accountability, and sanction is something that will work. And it relates to what was said during the previous panel. We need evidence, we need data, we need informed policy making. And it's not for me to say, I think it's more for the European Commission, but the publishing of the transparency report that we had a few weeks ago, I think, was a real step forward. It does raise issues of taxonomy. It does raise issues of comparison between different tech companies and how they're publishing their data. But it's the first step into getting a real accountability to protect children online.
Thank you very much. And so, Laura, I'm going to turn to you next in terms of civil society.
Well, I think I'm going to start by throwing in another 3-letter acronym in the mix. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, and it's the Artificial Intelligence Act, which has been indirectly mentioned by many of the panels today. And what I think is working well from a civil society perspective in the EU, taking into account the DSA, but also the AI Act and other legislative files, is the explicit textual commitment to upholding human rights. Obviously, that's not the end of the conversation, it's only the starting point, but it's important to have this recognition set out in text, as well as the risks of different human rights harms that come with the implementation of new technologies, just so that we can hold the different creators behind these technologies or deployers accountable whenever these risks, in fact, do manifest or occur. So something that I want to mention is, for instance, the approach specific in the AI Act. Many of you already might know that there's a tiered system imposed by it based on the risk entailed by a particular AI system. And the analysis and the creation of unacceptable types of AI systems was entirely based, if not largely based, on the input of civil society organizations as to what were unacceptable risks in human rights terms. So for example, the very controversial prohibition on real-time biometric identification was the result of civil society organizations pushing heavily against mass surveillance. And that's the entire reason it ended up being worded as a prohibition, with many exceptions granted, but it is a step forward in terms of embracing these human rights risks and recognizing them when it comes to digital legislation. There's one more thing that I want to mention, and I think it's important because we're having this transatlantic conversation, and it's the form that EU legislation takes. So we've, right now in this panel, mentioned 2 regulations, which have binding provisions, and that, I think, sets a better tone than what we're seeing elsewhere, which takes a form of guidelines or guidance, these soft law instruments that don't tend to go as far. So I think that's something we can definitely rescue from the EU context, that the institutions have had the bravery and the foresight to actually put in place binding instruments that do try to capture a lot of the risks that come with new technologies.
Okay, thank you. And we'll definitely come back to some of the privacy aspects that you talked about as well. We'll revisit those in a moment. Benoît, if I can just turn to you as a regulator. Your
What's working?
here.
Can I start by what is not working? I'm sorry. I suspect at this point what is not working is the internet, which clearly is not safe for children. And as a regulator, we are hearing that so in a very loud tone coming from everywhere. When we discuss with our fellow colleagues across Europe, all the new digital service coordinators are saying the same thing. So the status quo is not working, and we feel a huge political pressure which is going extremely fast. What is not working is the fact that, sorry to say that, but in the past we have tried to address the issues on a national basis, on a member state basis, which do not work, because we expect the industry, tech industry, to deliver, and it's extremely difficult for them, let's recognize it, to comply with national laws, national requirements. But what is working is a DSA. And the DSA, because the DSA has been designed to set up a governance framework to fix those issues and to operators to operate at scale, at different scale. I use the word scale because the industry is always operating at scale, the tech industry, but it's also big scale or small scale. And kids, protecting kids is really the case where you want to act extremely locally at the level of the family to protect the children. So you have to be really have the capacity to reach out in each and every community. At the same time, you expect the industry to deliver something. So on the contrary, you want to act globally, and not only at the EU level, but as you say, on the transatlantic dialogue at a global level. And that's what really the DSA is about. It gives us a new capacity to channel all this political energy, to send it directly to the industry. We want something from the industry. We want something that we cannot force the industry to provide, which is better solutions which will be interoperable for users at a global level. And we want them to deliver it locally. And really, honestly, that's what the DSA is about. It's giving us an opportunity to leverage on the huge assets that we have. We have the Better Internet Kit at the EU level, a long-term involvement which dates back, building energy, knowledge on that level, and now we know how to combine it locally with member states. So really, at this point, we are seeing, to give you an example, in France, we had several laws that were voted in the past years. Some of them are on hold because we are not sure they are really compatible with the EU legislation. I will not say more. We have received letters from the EU Commission. So it's a direct measure of the political energy which is there. And the last one that at the beginning of the year, the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, commissioned a report by an expert groups on screens on children. And this report, which is public, I'm sorry it's in French, is really interesting because clearly we are seeing that we are not there yet, that the statu quo is not possible. We have to move, but there's also a recognition that we have to really separate the issues in small pieces to be able to solve them and to have a clear vision. And at this point, we are working as ARCOM on this report, trying to see how we can work with it, with the government. And we are recognizing that basically we see two working assumptions are, one, we need to mobilize ourselves in France to really bring more support, more tools, more assistance to families, to parents, to kids, to all the adults which participate in the education of children, and that has to be done on a member state basis. And we have to mobilize all the forces that we are seeing in parliament, in local government, in the civil society, to really take advantage of all the solutions that exist. That's half of it. The other half is that clearly we are not getting what we want from the industry. And on that part, we have to mobilize all our energy on a member state level and bring that to the EU level so that we have the political dynamic to face the industry and to make demands and say, this is what we want. And clearly, we want something that only the industry can deliver on a collective basis. And that's things that regulators cannot deliver. Because regulators are good at enforcing requirements on individual companies. But when you want an industry to operate on a global basis to find solutions, we need political energy. We need the kind of energy that we have seen in the Christchurch call, if you remember, to fight terrorism, where all the governments, a bunch of governments team together with the head of state, head of government saying, we want the industry to move. And we are seeing this dynamic building up very fast on child protection. So I'm sending a message to the industry, get ready. Get ready because we know you will need time to come back with solution, but you have to start now. We want new tools for family to protect the children, for the kids, for the children themselves, and you have to start organizing yourself to deliver on this request that is coming very fast.
I can feel people asking questions.
But, sorry, what I was just realizing for this kind of public and in the spirit of the transatlantic dialogue is that perhaps we are taking a bit things for granted that everybody really understand what how also the DSA, is structure and it works. So just really in 2 minutes, I will try this challenge. So just to say that basically, responding to the pressing need of, rebalancing a bit the power between the users and those providing the digital services. This new regulation took, shape. And basically, in the art of that, you have the idea of having a well-functioning digital single market. So, all the 27 member states together and, exchanging the same services without obstacles, but in full respect of the fundamental rights. And then we have like 3 ingredients. From one side, we want, of course, one pillar is the preservation of privacy, so personal data protection. Then we want fair and open market. And then we have also a very strong consumer protection law. And under that, and with that, of course, we have the fundamental rights, including the right of the child. So this is a bit the basic. Then, in order of how then to monitor and to enforce this regulation, the responsibility are shared. And is also a bit of premiere for us as Commission, because we were given the role really of enforcement body, starting with the Digital Service Act, and now the same is going to happen under the Act soon, and it's really within DG Connect. So it's really a very interesting challenge, very demanding. But so basically under the DSA, the bigger you are, the more responsibility. So there is a horizontal harmonized provision for all the services accessible by by minors, and that they have to provide appropriate and proportionate measures to ensure the high privacy, safety, and security. Then there are specific measures for the very large online platform or very large online engines. So those who have more than 45 million users, so 1/10 of the population in the EU, because we consider that they really have an impact on society, and then can have really, systemic risk that have to be mitigated. So they have to be designed, and they are designed in waves. There was a first wave of designation, which was in the spring of last year. Then they have a cycle of 3 months to assess their, risk and to present their risk mitigation measures to the Commission, and then the analysis starts. So that's why then, if you read, in the news, from time to time, there are these either requests for further information, and the Commission has asked to all the platforms where, very popular among the minors for this additional information. And then, as already mentioned before, already 2 formal proceedings have started in the winter. Then, in the meantime, there was a second wave where 3 adult content, very large online platforms, were identified. So for them, the DSA started really kicking only as of last April, okay? Yes. And then in terms of distribution of competencies between the Commission and the Member States, so Manuela and Benoît. So for Benoît, the fun started on the 17th of February, where, this board was formed, and the national regulators, they are responsible for the enforcement of the DSA vis-à-vis of the platforms below the 45 million users. So this is how this is constructed, and how we are really, part of a team, and we really need to work together. But also we need to build, and to build on and benefit from all the expertise and already networks that we have built in the meantime. So for instance, dialogue between the national coordinator of the DSAs and the Safer Internet Centers is very much welcome. The trusted flaggers that will be appointed, and this kind of things. So I hope to have clarified, not to have confused you more. And I can stop.
We'll find that out with the questions, won't we, Manuela, at the end. Paul, just So please do, like with the other panels, if there are questions, there will be some time at the end for questions for when all those questions that I feel you will all writing down. Paul, forgive me.
I just wanted to follow up to what Mrs. Martra and Mr. Loutrel just said, but and I want to join on the remark of the get ready. Companies get ready to be on board with us, because the situation is incredibly serious on children protection worldwide. Just for a few figures, just to put some context in it, every second worldwide, it's 2 images of pedocriminal content that are watched and downloaded and shared. And it's not only on the dark web, it's not something of organized crime and very hidden, it's something on the open web. The situation is also exploding. I think in 2020, and I just say that off the top of my head, but I think it can be searched for, but in 2020, French police received approximately dozens every year of cases of sextortion. In 2024, it was 9,000. Same thing with video conference. We've witnessed a new phenomenon of video conference used to do pedocriminal activity as a service. So that's mainly in Philippines. We've seen a lot of cases where for only 20 to 60 euros, someone can command an act of pedocriminality. All of that shows that, first, the situation is incredibly serious. The response needs to be transnational, and so the diplomatic action is very important. And also, and I'll try to be nice with the ARCOM board members, but we need to have more reinforcement of police, reinforcement of judiciary capacity, and reinforcement of the coordinator of digital service capacity.
I feel my refereeing coming in here. One thing I will just add, I'm going to support that, if I may, if you indulge me a moment. So just to support the point that increase that you're seeing. So from a UK perspective, one of the helplines that we've operated since 2015, Laura remembers, so the revenge porn helpline, that's been seen by far the biggest demand on our services. So we've seen a 10-fold increase in cases in the last 4 years. So to give you some numbers, we managed 1,600 cases in 2019, and then last year that was just under 19,000. So more than a 10-fold increase, which is, I mean, that's specifically to do with adults, but it's, I think, symptomatic of exactly, Paul, what you're describing there. So in terms of specific challenges, Benoît, you've already talked about what's not working. Are there any other specific challenges that we want to see, you want to kind of contribute or share or to talk about? Another one which I think, Manuela, we talking about the DSA, is one that I keep hearing too, is about public opinion and public awareness about these regulations too. And if there are any particular challenges there as well. But more generally speaking, any other challenges that anyone wants to contribute?
Maybe one, I'm not sure if it's the most difficult one, but one is really the interoperability of norms. We need to share norms at the level of the European Union. This is what the DSA is doing, of course, but I don't think we're ready on CSAM AI generated. I don't think we're ready in terms of, just as an example, Germany, the Netherlands forbid the possession of manuals to do pedocriminal activity. Mm-hmm. Manuals on pedocriminal activity are very easily findable online. France does not. Spain does not. Italy does not. On AI CSAM generated, on CSAM AI generated, sorry, there's there's no link between the legislation in Southeast Asia and Europe. So one of the challenge, at least one of the challenge for the French diplomacy, is to try to have this interoperability of norm and of legislation. And we've already done that on privacy, for example. We've seen in California that they've looked at how we're doing privacy law, and really it influenced how they're doing it. So it's not a challenge that cannot be overcome. It's still a challenge, I think.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to?
I'd like to comment on the risks that we're seeing from a human rights perspective. So just to ground this conversation in the FOSI context, which I think is necessary, CDT is a human rights organization, and of course, the way we approach the risk to children is as rights holders, not so much within the context of victims, but as people who have rights and whose rights should be respected, not least the right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression online, which other panelists have already acknowledged is a huge factor to consider in legislation and in policy making. The concerns that arise with recent legislation is mostly in relation to enforcement. So sometimes the legislation sets a really good tone of what's possible and what should be achievable, but the concern that civil society organizations like ourselves share is whether or not the laws are going to be able to live up to the very high standards that they set for themselves, which we would want them to do. And a key component of that is effective redress and public awareness or civil society oversight. So taking the AI Act as an example, because it's recent and it will be relevant to many of you in this room, whenever there are AI systems that fall within the high-risk category under the Act, not to make this into an AI Act masterclass, but essentially there are a series of obligations that come for both deployers and providers, which are important in upholding human rights, not least, for example, the obligation to conduct a fundamental rights impact assessment, another important civil society win in the AI Act negotiations. And one of the ways in which an AI system can become high risk is if it falls in one of the high risk uses foreseen by the Act. And one of these is law enforcement. Another one is immigration and border control, which are important contexts for civil society to have closer scrutiny of, given that they're important contexts for human rights violations very often. And one issue that we see with the AI Act is that those high risk uses of AI systems are not necessarily going to be publicly accessible or even of public knowledge, simply because they're going to be, by law, put in a database that civil society will not have access to. So it's going to become increasingly difficult for organizations like us to monitor these uses and to be able to call them out. And this is not the first time that such a risk has manifested. We already saw it with the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, for those of you who are familiar with it. It's the EU data protection law. And then again, the GDPR set wonderful rights, access, erasure, modification of data, deletion. We love that. But the issue with GDPR has been very often that we are not aware of the different uses of data that take place behind closed doors, and that makes it virtually impossible for people to exercise their rights in the way the legislation would have foreseen. And this is the fear with the AI Act as well, that it might go that far. And I think this fear can also extend to the DSA. Law enforcement officials will definitely have a role in terms of flagging what they consider to be illegal content and takedown. And there the concern is as well, are we going to achieve the right balance with the priority of freedom of expression, which for sure the DSA espouses, and this is reflected in a series of provisions in the text. So what we're worried about is that we're not going to live up to the discourse that we've been seeing. And given that there are limited civil society channels of oversight, that the onus is going to be that much more in the institutions to make sure that they uplift their obligations to meet the standards that they committed to in public.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Benoît, do you want to?
Well, I guess one of the biggest challenge will be really to deliver something to all the families that work at scale in a way, because as we speak, all the platforms are providing services to protect the children, but you have to nearly have a PhD and work part-time and don't work at all if you want to have the time to take advantage of all the tools that exist. So clearly that's where I'm saying we need the industry to do something and to work, as was mentioned by Paul, on the interoperability, which means standards, and clearly the standards are not even set up on an AU level. So that's why also the DSA is moving away from what you call the soft law, but not moving to the hard law, but moving in between, where you have the compliance, where we can make requests to the companies, and they have to come back with their proposal, and then we can enforce it. And this degree of freedom that we are leaving to the industry is strategic, because it allows the industry to come back with a solution that we will check is implemented and enforced if need be in Europe, but that can be also fit the requirement of other regions of the world. We are not trying to get rid of the globality of the business model. So I think that's where one of the difficulty is. And maybe just to reverse the title from the DSA to the USA, but also from the USA to the DSA, you have things that we have to learn from you, from the other side of the Atlantic. And typically, I have in mind something which we are dreaming to have in the EU. As we speak, it's on the privacy side, not on child protection, but you can imagine very easily you will see how to apply it to child protection. Under the California law for privacy, there is a requirement in the law that allows somebody to delegate to a third party the capacity to exercise its right to access the data that the company hold on a given individual and to exercise its right. And on that basis, an NGO, I think it qualifies as an NGO, Consumer Report, to name them, has developed an application which is called Permission Slip, if I'm correct, where you can, on your either on your smartphone, either Android or iOS, with one application, exercise all your right to protect your privacy and get hold of the information that all the platforms have on you, and exercise your right on all the platforms just with one application. Imagine if we could have that to set all the parameters that on all the website applications that your kid is accessing. So this is this kind of thing that we need. And I was trying to describe it before that, but now say just look at what is being done in the US with this example of the permission slip application developed by Consumer Report. So we have to receive also a lot of things from the other side of the Atlantic.
Okay, yes, it's a dialogue. It's clearly both ways as well. Manuela.
I would say that the challenge is that we are now facing a time of change, because then again, well, probably you all know, but very soon this weekend we will have the election for the new European Parliament, and then there will be also a change of commission. This commission was extremely busy in completing and providing a legal framework fit for digital age. So the challenge is really then a continuity, and we, because we see that there is now time, needed for a proper implementation of the rules. So the risk is that then, there are a lot of ideas for, other rules. So we still, the first step would be to see the full potential, to give time, like to the DSA, really to see exactly what is able to address and how, and then to consider if there are still gaps and to do, but not then to go into a confusion mode. And then the challenge, still an open challenge, but on which we are working very hard, is a European approach towards age insurance / age verification. So just to underline that both the DSA and the AI Act are absolutely risk-based, because that was also, a strong request which came from each and every panel. So that is really the starting point. And but we are also very aware that we have to start where, first there is a kind of harmonized approach, which is where, there is adult content that is for the 18+, and to address that, and in a, in a firm and efficient and effective way. So when we use the term age verification, we really mean that to get the kids from age inappropriate, age adult content. And then in general also the age assurance that reflect the evolving capacity of the children, take into consideration the best interest of the child. So we have set up a task force with the member states and also with the European Association of the Regulators, ERGA, and with the European Association of the Data Protection Authorities, the EDPB, and we are discussing this approach. We have now an interesting tool which is provided by another piece of European legislation, which is the digital wallet, the European e-identity. And so we think that that could really then provide something that all the users, the citizens in Europe can use easily, and we are working in order to get there on time. Yeah.
Okay. To talk about age assurance there, and I know clearly other panels have talked about age assurance. And were there anything anyone wants to add or comment? If not, we can move on. So we have talked about so safety and privacy in lots of this, and given the time is marching on, we may come back to that if time allows. But I do want to save some significant time for some questions. I do want to give you opportunity. This is dialogue. This is transatlantic dialogue, and this particular question around what your number one piece of advice to policymakers, trying to pass online safety regulation, what would that be? What would be your number one piece of advice? Thank you, Benoît.
Increase the pressure on the industry, refrain from passing no regulation too fast.
Okay.
Give a last chance to the industry to deliver, but make clear request interoperability. Just make simple request, because we recognize that in the long term we are going to build something incredible with a digital wallet, but we will need time to get the digital wallet. So the question is really, we need something in between. And the key question is here, how do we recognize the value of this political energy, which is really the key. If you ignore it, it's a problem. If you recognize it, it's part of the solution. So make requests to the industry, because the industry needs some room of maneuver, but we need to be sure the industry will deliver something. So that would be my message.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, there was a parallel earlier that was made with the TCO regulation, the Christchurch call to combat terrorism online. I think it was a pretty good example of how regulation should be made. When we had this horrific attack in 2019 in Christchurch, what we've done was to create a multi-stakeholder forum with companies, with civil society, and together we've tested processes, crisis protocols. We've coordinated ourselves in terms of positive communication. So we've designed a whole set of provision and measures. And then we arrived at the European Commission and pushed for a TCO regulation that allows for the removal of terrorist content in an hour. So in this case, we've actually demonstrated that the regulation was possible, that it was effective, that industry had the tools to do it. And then we arrived at the European Commission having already done the proof of concept. And I think it's a pretty good example of how informed policy making should look like.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Laura?
I want to agree wholeheartedly with what Benoît said in terms of don't rush to legislate. I have a background as a lawyer, so it might be unexpected for you to hear me say this, but I think it's really important that we don't regulate before we understand the technology that we're purporting to regulate and the tools with which we can regulate that technology effectively. And also I think it's key to come back to the risk-based approach. I actually think that we should be striving for a rights-based approach. Risk-based approaches and rights-based approaches aren't totally exclusive. I think we can definitely have something that works both ways, but I think we can see it with recent legislation that has been passed in the EU, and I always take the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, as a comparator. And the reason that I say this is we look at the AI Act, we look at risk-based legislation that takes or draws heavily from product safety legislation. We're not really looking at any rights, not really. We're looking at perhaps indirect rights or passive rights, but nothing like GDPR. And we don't even have in the AI Act effective remedies. I think that needs to be front and center. And we need to make sure that if we're committing to risk-based regulation, that we, first of all, challenge the uses of the technology that we're trying to regulate. Is it even effective? Is it even worth rolling out in some contexts? And to be really thorough in the bans and the prohibitions to make sure that we're not inadvertently authorizing something that has no proven evidence-based effectiveness or real purpose.
Okay. I'd like to follow on from that one in terms of a question as well around how regulation can keep pace with technological developments. Luke mentioned a point, forgive me Luke, wherever you are, hello, talked about best available techniques, I think it was. Clearly generative AI we see emerging, how it impacts removing of content. But so the broadly question is, how do you think we can keep pace with, how regulation can keep pace with emerging technologies?
You want me to continue to say the DSA is a very good framework? That was part of the term of reference in the drafting of the architecture of the DSA. We are really afraid that that the EU Parliament and the EU Council of Member States would legislate to set up a solution to fix the issue we were facing yesterday and not the one we will be facing tomorrow. And that's why the DSA is so difficult to read for people who are not familiar with regulation, because you have nearly no direct regulation cast in the stone of the DSA. So, and to give you an example, now we know we are going to die because of generative AI, whereas 2 years ago we were not aware that we were about to die because of generative AI. So we went back to the DSA and say, do we have generative AI in the DSA? And you don't have the word generative AI in the DSA. And then we look at it, is it a problem? No, because the DSA has been designed to be flexible enough to address the issue we are going to face tomorrow, and we know that today it's generative AI, tomorrow it will be something else. So I think it's really, that's what we are learning. That's why I'm saying with the DSA, we think we have the governance to work together, to address issues that we will be facing tomorrow without compromising on civil liberty, on freedom of speech. That's why we have those key mechanisms, transparency everywhere. Transparency which apply to the platform, but also to the regulators, by the way, to the trusted flaggers. So, no, I think we have the capacity. That's what really the DSA is about. If you have to, it's, and that also, it's, can I take one additional minute? At some point we wonder, what is the success of the DSA? And some journalists came to us saying, oh, success of the DSA is that you are going to put huge fine on TikTok, on X, and say, no. If we put huge fine, it means that we are failing. So other people came afterwards and say, no, success of the DSA is that hate speech will disappear. Disinformation will disappear, and say, no way. Hate speech always existed before the internet was invented. It's a constant battle. So the success of the DSA is that before the DSA, we felt powerless facing all those informational disorders. With the DSA, we feel empowered to fight those battles and to deal with new technologies that will continue to exist and to come forward every year.
Okay.
Let's go and win this battle.
Indeed. That would be a lovely end to it, but we're going to carry on.
No, I will just stress that, yes, indeed, the TSA is a bit technology neutral. You know, it's a framework, is a mechanism, and then, you know, that is the way to be future proven. Is also a bit context agnostic, but that, so it means that it does not define what is illegal or what is harmful, okay? There is then, is left up to the services then to identify what are the risks and to mitigate the risk. But then indeed perhaps it will be worth in future a discussion really, you know, to kind of find some common parameters to not necessarily under the DSA, but really, you know, in terms of content rating and really also age rating to succeed in this age-appropriate approach. But then coming back to Laura and what she mentioned on the AI, and also, you know, the challenges for civil society then to keep pace and to be relevant. Okay, I would say that the good news is already that you can forget what are then the AI that will be really, you know, impacting negatively on the fundamental rights because they will be prohibited, okay? And then again, it's a risk-based approach and it will be a graduated also approach in coming into force. So this AI Act, which again is the first effort in the world really to provide a legal framework. There was the formal adoption by the Council of the EU, 27th of May, I think. Now in the coming weeks, indicatively in July, we will have the publication in the official journal, and then tentatively in August, it will come into effect. But then again, it will start, and where it will start, of course, 6 months later, already from the most dangerous, application that they will be forbidden, so prohibition immediately. And then there is specific attention on the general purpose AI. So, for instance, the code of conduct that are being developed, then they will come 9 months later, while then the full, speed application will be in 2 years. So again, we are, trying to build the blocks. And then again, there is a big challenge for the Commission because this AI office is actually a directorate of DG Connect, which will serve for the purpose, with some also new units created to address as well the risky applications and also the application for good, because we have also to remind that here we are discussing more the risk, but there are also a lot of opportunities.
Okay. Unless I'm going to, I'm just going to we've got a few minutes, 6 minutes left, and I'm going to come to questions for everybody, and as I suspected, right? Okay. If we have someone with a microphone, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Maeve Walsh. I'm from the Online Safety Act network in the UK, which, as the title suggests, is focused on the implementation of the Online Safety Act. I totally understand and get the imperative not to rush to legislate, and certainly in the UK we didn't rush to legislate at all. It took us a very long time to get our act onto the statute book. But I just wanted to pick up some of the relevance of the conversations earlier today in the digital parenting panel and the industry panel, where the imperative is very much still on parents in the absence of tangible action from the platforms. The emphasis is still very much on parents to either keep themselves and their children safe through greater media literacy or through using the tools that exist on services. And I think we also obviously touched on the smartphone ban campaign. I think that is a result of parents' frustration that they haven't really seen any tangible action from companies, and the risks and the harms are getting greater, and the threats are getting greater, and so forth. So I think there is a feeling of helplessness there. So picking up on the don't rush to legislate point, there is a risk that you end up with bad legislation in the form of bans that won't work. So I just wondered how regulators, in particular, can use that energy from parents as the imperative, I think, that the industry might need to go further and faster, or whether there is something kind of at an international level that could be done on that. Thank you.
Maeve, thank you very much. Benoît, that's a question for you.
I guess we are realizing, honestly, that even if with the support of governments, with all the political energy, with all the skills of regulators, we manage to get the best from the tech industry, it won't be sufficient. And we have reached that conclusion over a year ago, and we are coming back saying we need to build what we call digital citizenship, which meaning the individual have to be part of the solution, and the parents are at the heart of the system. And that's we've been trying to introduce that in the debate in France, and we are trying to work with the civil society, with local governments, and we are in preliminary phases to identify new partners, new ways to mobilize that, and to get them to realize that in fact the DSA is a framework for them, and it's also a framework that they are part of the solution, and to get them to realize. As we speak, we're doing it typically with trusted flaggers, which is an easy starting point, reaching out to various groups, NGOs who are defending a cause, children or people being abused, whatever, and get them to realize that trusted flagger is both a capacity to have a quick fix, it's an emergency number, but then it's also a capacity to have information and to be part of the policy discussion, and then and to get another legitimacy to reach out again to people who are participating in those NGOs, to empower them also, because we don't want to have the platform to protect us from everything. The consequence, it's unrealistic, and the consequence will be terrible. So we have to work on the other side, on the citizen, on the parents, on the family. So we are starting this discussion with, and if anybody is interested and have ideas, please.
I'm conscious we've got 2 minutes left.
So super quick, just to follow up. As Commission, we are continuing funding the Safer Internet Center, and one of their big target group are parents. So we rely then, we cascade, on these centers in the member states to do, yeah, exactly. And we know that, of course, it's not an easy group to reach, but we keep doing that. Then, as well, I should mention that soon we will start the consultation of, all group of stakeholders on the guidelines on the Article 28 of the Digital Service Act, because for these, provisions for all the services accessible by children, for the privacy, security, and safety, there is the need of these guidelines, and so there will be also the possibility of all groups, including representation of parents. I need to stop, I know, yeah.
Can we take one more question? One more question.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Anna Miniel from ICMEC, the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I think you've made a compelling point that the DSA is a good tool for children based in the EU. My question would be, how do we ensure that children outside of the EU are protected from offenders based in the EU? I'm referring specifically to live streaming threats. How do you think regulators within the EU can act on the offenders that are based in the EU to protect children outside of the EU?
I can, my contribution, we know the EU is not the world. Typically, I don't know why, the UK left the EU. But that's Ofcom, it gave an incentive for Ofcom to do something, and Ofcom with the Australian e-safety regulator has created the GOSREN, Global Online Safety Regulatory Network. We had a last meeting on Tuesday, yesterday, and clearly protection of children is a top priority, so it's part of the solution. And of course, we are using the networks that have already been supported by the EU Commission.
The INOP network, for instance, really to fight child sexual abuse material, is a global one. They are present, I think, in 44 countries with 46 hotlines. Yeah. So.
Paul?
Maybe just a few points in conclusion. It doesn't relate directly to DSA, but I think the main answer is law enforcement coordination. I think we've done, the French police and the US police has done quite a good work with Philippines over the past few years. It was the case in Romania as well. So law enforcement coordination. I have to commend the work of civil societies organization as well. The NECMEC in the US is the eyes of a whole lot of law enforcement agency over the world. And finally, I think that it might not be for me to say, but we need to get other countries to adopt DSA-like legislation. And it all comes back to what we said at the beginning and the interoperability of norms. It's also our diplomatic goal to show to other parts of the world that the DSA is useful and the DSA is used and the DSA is efficient.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, clearly we have run out of time, but there will be, as Julie said, for the last panel, there'll be any questions that you have, which I suspect there may be many. There'll be form an orderly queue in front of the panel. But if I can just ask you to express your thanks to the panel. Thanks very much.